We're just playing a real life game of Monopoly right now, where the goal and the only winning strategy is to get rich, except now we're just stealing from everybody else, trying to screw them over. This is not how you freaking do it, you morons. Deluxification, satisfaction, gluttony, a tariff is a tax imposed on goods when they cross national borders, typically when they're imported into a country. There is no confusion about what that is, period. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk tariffs. Holy freaking balls, right? Let's go. It's a tax on imported goods coming into the country, right? As stated, they directly affect the imported price of the goods because somebody, the company, has to essentially, potentially take that in. And it leads to higher prices, whether it's you getting directly passed on the bill or the company making it, passing on in some way, shape, or form. It has the real potential to drastically change and alter trade dynamics, international relations, and indirectly protect, potentially, and this is the theory, but this is the absolute lack of planning at the same time, domestic industries making foreign products less competitive. I mean, right, that's the ideal. If I can make it here and I can make it for cheaper than somewhere else, then potentially, assuming the company isn't too greedy in the first place, then the consumer can get it for cheaper, right? It's a lot cheaper for me to get coffee $20 down the road than pay $18 plus $7 shipping from out of state, out of country, out of whatever, right? That sounds idealistic. Now, board games, tabletop games in particular. We have long said that the cheapest place to get these, given the scale manufacturing, even with the transportation, as illustrated in my example there, where in theory, if I was next to the roaster of coffees and I could go down the street and get it for $18 as opposed to $20, then that shipping cost actually pushes it over for that local person. But if it doesn't, if coffee shipped still only runs me $18 as opposed to going $20 down the road, plus or minus the gas price, then obviously the winner is in the opposite driver's seat there. And here's the tricky part. We have no manufacturing in America. In North America, would I say whatever you want from that aspect of things, right? The whole theory behind this is that if you can target the right things and give people time to build up the ability to produce said same goods, well, then you can be competitive. But, and this is the big but, if you just slam people with them in the get-go with no regard for how that's going to affect the companies that are already trying to balance and manage this, well, then you're shooting yourself in your foot. Or, frankly speaking, you just don't freaking care. Going to be very careful also not to drop some expletives here because this is one of those videos where I probably should be in the first place. Now, we've all seen the numbers. They've gone from what, 25 to 45 to 95 to whatever, 145 it is at the time of me filming this. And some people, simplistically, are going, well, you know what, Chris, that's what, $2, $6, whatever it may be on your cost of consumer side. I'll pay $6 extra. Yeah, you know, that's the ultra simplistic view of things. And if you want to boil it down to an oversimplistic plan, sure. At the same time, there's a lot of freaking logistical steps along the way that are screwing the people that are making the games in the first place. Because you can do that on a micro scale, but the macroeconomics of this do not equal the same issue. Do that with a couple $1 million worth of product and you have a bigger issue, right? Similarly, this cost on a larger scale incurs larger amounts of money. And you go, well, Chris, if it's just $6 per game, I'll pay the $6. Folks, this is a tax when it enters. To enter the country, pay this money, which means that companies who are shipping over set amount of games based on the price that they are going to have to fork that up immediately. Immediately. This isn't a, we'll float you a loan for a couple months so you can get it in the car. No! And so the margin that's already there is not possible to get to until you have it in there in the first place. Especially with this crowdfunding situation where it's already kind of paid for, it's an issue, right? Because if you have 4,000 of these games and you're having to say now pay an extra $10 on all of them, I don't know about you, but the board game tabletop industry, right? There's all these accusations going around. Awakened Realms, CMON, all of these big companies are making all sorts of, we just saw with CMON's stock report, their growth investment situation, they lost like between $1 and $2 million in the last financial year. And that's not to say as one of the biggest Asmodee. And so they probably have a much larger cash reserve than anyone else. But when you're talking these thousands of games, you're seeing small publishers with the couple thousand products or less being hit with 6-digit taxes at the time of me filming this. Hopefully it's going to go down. But when it went from like 45 to 145, their taxes went from like a couple thousand to hundreds of thousands. And if you're somebody, say, like Druid City or Succubus, who's the one behind Madara, or if you're even Ghost Galaxy, who has the upcoming Lord of the Rings confrontation, you're going, I don't necessarily have that without depleting my reserves altogether. And I don't know about you or how you do your financials, right? Do you want your savings to be next to this? Does that make you comfortable in case of an emergency, like my car breaking down earlier in the week, where all of a sudden I have a significant chunk of money that needs to be spent for me to even operate, for me to even get to my job? And now take the equivalent of that to the board game tabletop side of things. Some of these can afford to crowdfund. Some of these are coming crowdfunding earlier. But even the development of a game takes this. We see this all the time where small publishers are like, I'm struggling to get the art because art is freaking expensive. Development of it is expensive. I don't know about you, but can you wait, let's say 4 months to get your first paycheck? Because, Chris, it doesn't cost anything to develop a game, Chris. You can just sit there on the table and just think about how you're going to develop the prototype. Okay. Prototypes, the ones that get sent to me, right? Like, I don't know the exact figures, but when I get a shipment directly from the factory for some of these companies that send me the first copy prototypes for crowdfunding, for example, folks, these prototypes are not cheap. I've had numerous small publishers say it's between like $50 and $150 for some of these prototypes. Because if you go to like makeplayingcards.com, one of those websites that allows you to print your own cards and decks and things like that, it's a scaled economy. The less you print, the more they cost. As in also reverse crowdfunding. The more they print, the overall cheaper the cost per unit. But more units, more overwhelming cost to enter the country. You see where this is starting to be a problem, right? Because although the manufacturing is cheaper, it's going to cost you more to get it in. And we have zero capability to anything scale in this country. So again, ideally, you have the manufacturing before you put these in place. Because these are also, potentially money making for the government, but it's a fraction of other taxes like, income tax that you actually can get on a yearly basis. All it does is it drives these companies, supply and demand wise, down. Now you're going, okay, Chris, let's just wait them out. Let's just wait the tariffs out. Okay. Folks, how much money do you think it takes to store games, thousands of games for a couple months? Again, not much cheaper. It is cheaper, but not much cheaper than the tariffs in the first place. Because if you thought that was just a completely viable and utterly great solution, Don't you think the smarter people in the industry would be saying, oh, yeah, Chris, no big deal. We'll just store them all over there for a couple months or a year or two. Oh, got that covered. No. If it's going to cost us more to import them, we'll just make less of them. Okay. Supply and demand, right? Well, we just can't import as many. You're not going to have as big a runs and everything's going to sell out. Oh, also, in order to pay for that and to compensate for the fact that each individual one is still going to be higher and we can't bring over as many at a time, the cost is going to be, kind of going up. And so there's going to be less available. And so that's not, in theory, again, a bad issue, right? Because you have too many games to play in the first place. You have way too much consumerism driven in this hobby in the first place, right? Like, I have been routinely shouting on this channel from the rooftop since I made it that there is too much consumerism for the sake of consumerism going on across the board. So having a little less of that is okay with me. At the same time, the sheer lack of regard for people in general, with these taxes, with these cuts, with everything that's going along with this, is a blatant slap in the face for people who are working hard to make a living. And when you are callously choosing to cost people their living in any way, shape, or form, with zero regard for the ramifications, that pisses me off, period. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you fall on. It doesn't matter where you're at, government or private sector. That should piss you off too, of blatantly trying to screw people because you don't give a freaking fruitcake. Now let's play devil's advocate though, because again, a little less consumerism, I'm okay with. I am also a big proponent on this channel, as many of you longtime viewers know, of less is more. I will very frankly state all the time that our hobby has jumped the shark a little bit. We have way too much deluxeification, satisfaction, gluttony in this hobby. All the games that have the metal coins, all the games that have the miniatures, all the games that are, frankly speaking, when I look at some of these boxes, maybe not some of these, but you know what? Let's pick on All Play for a second here. Do you need a big box for all of this? No. Do you need some of these other boxes that I've got going around, right? Some of these boxes where, you know what? The Japanese do it right. The minimalistic approach with cubes and a box size that's actually fitting the game, not to make it look nice on the shelf so it gets the attention. I guarantee you half the boxes in your collection are sized the way they are so they show up better on shelves. Not necessarily your shelves, because I know on your shelf you don't care about that, but on Target's shelf, on the local game store's shelf. And so removing some excess, in theory, again, is great. This is not how you freaking do it, you morons. Publishers are echoing this sentiment, right? Like, because you and I can argue about it. You and I can debate about, well, how much of it is it going to have? These are the people whose livelihoods, again, are dependent on this. The first hand. And again, it's not we're just trying to be greedy and we're going to market. No, it's literally, this is what they're dealing with supply chain and everything else wise. So you could make the argument that one of these could be a little bit wink, wink, nudge, nudge. When you have literally over 100 people saying the same thing, are you the one that's right? Or perhaps the 100 of people who are literally doing this for a job, sustain themselves. You know what? It's a conspiracy, right? All of them are conspiring together in back channels, and it's not leaking, just like COVID, right? Everyone's conspiring around the world against us. Going back to that for a second, where I was going with that is you can scale some stuff down. You know what? I would love to see more card games. I would love to see more print and plays. I would love to see more of the Japanese minimalistic design element of things. Because again, does that need miniatures? Hell no. Do we need, cards that are twice the size? Do I need boards that take up the whole thing? Do I need a euro that encompasses then most people's tables in the first place? And again, some of these are not going to be immediate trickle downs. You can afford to lose money, right? Like if you don't have a job, it's not like you're going to immediately be out on the street, right? But some of these bills, if you're paying Peter, you may have to rob Paul to do it. If you have to pay this amount of tariffs, do you have the overhead for literally the lights of your business? Do you have the overhead to pay your employees? Do you have the overhead to store the games over here? Because then that's the other element we always talk about, right? Which is why I like crowdfunding in some ways, is because it's a pre-order system, right? You know exactly how many games you have to make to fulfill things. It's not a question mark of, I'm going to make 3,000 games, and what the hell happens if I can only sell 1,000 of them? I have to pay for storage then for these other 2,000 that don't sell. And then they don't sell, and then they don't sell, and then they don't sell, and then you're selling them for $30 originally, but now, you know, you're lucky if you can get 25 for the next 200, and then you can only get another 200 sold at $20. And then what do you do with that product? Do you burn it? It's burning cash in a hole in your pocket. You try and sell it for $10 so you can get something else, right? Diminishing returns. But now you've sold, 1,500 of those. Well, actually, let's say 1,000 of those. You're still left with 500 of them for $10. Well, they cost $15 to make. How long can you hemorrhage money and still pay all of those other things that I said? And that, folks, is the trickle-down domino effect. That is what everyone is worried about. It's not just that, can I add $6 to this, right? The other trickle-down effect that, people are choosing to ignore in that silo. Because again, $6, $8, several of these articles on Board Game Geek and elsewhere from, publishers who are doing crowdfunding, who are at retail, they're saying, okay, yeah, $2 to $8. Okay, we can pass that on. People can afford this. Okay, inflation. We've seen some of the other tariffs go down at the time of me filming this. Other prices are going up just with sheer inflation, right? That means other household costs are going up. And so discretionary income, overarchingly, long story short, is going to go down. Okay, not a big deal, Chris. I can still afford to pay for $6 here. I can afford to pay $6 there. It's a coffee here. Okay. But when your car insurance goes up by 100, when your rent goes up by 100, when your child needs something extra now that's twice as much, or you're paying 30% more of groceries, eggs, anyway, going up on a weekly basis, how much is that going to trickle down into discretionary income? And it may not be, and this is the most important point, right? It may not be you, but I guarantee that it's going to affect some people whose discretionary income is less than yours. And then what happens, right? Then you have contracture, less people buying stuff, then potentially less people selling things. If you can't sell the stuff, you can't pay your overhead. How long can you keep losing money like that? And for all of you outside of North America, you're going, sorry, sucker. Okay, I get that, right? Okay, I get that. You're going, okay, I don't want to pay your costs, Chris. I don't want to deal with your BS that's trickling down into my stuff. I completely hear you. I understand that. I have no problem with that. The problem, though, is from some of these publishers, some of the data that's out there, very limited view of things, but the general overarching number that I saw recently was North America, rightly or wrongly so, accounts for about 70% of a lot of publishers' business from that aspect of things. If 70%, no matter if you are a Japanese publisher, a European publisher, a North American publisher, wherever else, that is a huge market share to now have people spending less on overarchingly, because that's going to smack everybody across the face, across the board. If all of a sudden, again, North America is spending, let's make up a number here, they're spending $50 million on board games, right? And you lose $10 million of that overarchingly, right? The rest of the world is that 30%. The rest of the world would be about $20 million then. So let's say all of the rest of the world decides to increase collectively their spending by 25%. That's still only making up potentially half of what is lost for these companies. And so somebody is going to get hit by that. That is not insignificant. That is going to happen. That's not a question. So again, you're going, okay, Chris, well, you can't get it from China. North America, okay, great. Where else can we go? Well, you've got several publishers saying, hey, we have been doing this for months with the fear that this could have happened. And the printing quotes from several publishers, this is directly from some of the Board Game Geek publisher articles. You have China, you have Europe, and one of the quotes now outside of China literally 6 times the Chinese cost. Okay, that's not insignificant. Now, obviously, it's not going to lead to 6 times the cost for you, but for a card game that people always complain about, right? They complain about the cost of some of this stuff on crowdfunding. Okay, what if all retail card games are now $30? I just bought Flip 7 the other day for $9, under $9 in tax. What if Flip 7 was $30? Right? It's a great game. You want to pay $30 for a deck of cards? Are you okay with that? That is the real, going a little extreme at the same time, potential situation if this were to be sustained in that matter. And again, you can make the argument that it probably won't be sustained, but the fact that it's gotten to this point in the first place just screams idiocy as well. And consequently, the other thing that we don't talk about there is, okay, if I have less money to bring games over, if I have much money to make games in the first place, what's that going to do to the conventions? Is convention going to also, right? Not that it's going to do it significantly, but it'd be really interesting to see that, if you can't bring more games to the convention to sell them, then how likely are you to go there? Because a lot of these publishers go there to sell games, to hawk their games. Or when they do hawk and bring over those, 50 pre-production copies that are the hottest of the hot from your biggest named companies in the first place, are you willing to, instead of the $45 game getting an upcharge to $60 at the convention, are you okay with that because it was airshipped over and it was made in China and needed to be brought over with this taxes in place? Are you willing to pay $120 for that $45 game? Well, you can't guarantee that the print run that they're going to actually bring over later is more than a couple hundred. So a couple shops online are going to get it. A couple local maybe stores are going to get it. And then you're just not going to have a chance to get it. So how FOMO driven are you? And again, that goes back to the opposite argument that, well, you know what, Chris, if I just can't get it, maybe I'll force myself to play my games. You, in theory, are telling yourself that. But I guarantee you, count how many games you've bought in the last 3 months. And then tell me that that's going to be what you want to do or what you could choose to do, right? Whew. I know, right? Myself included. The other trickle down that they've already said is European publishers. They're going, okay, when you get those Europe games, like when we go over to Essen, right? And people port them over and they mule them over and then they talk about them. And then eventually you forum query the situation of the game. When is a US publisher, when is a North American publisher going to pick this up? Well, the answer might be never. Okay, that's fine, Chris. Okay, that's fine. I'll just get it from... The last game I tried to import from Italy was a $56 game that isn't available in North America right now. It is a game called Shinjuku. And when I tried to do the shipping for this game, a $56 game over there, it was an additional $56 to America. Oh, yeah, right? So then you're paying, and that's because it's a little bit of a premium markup because you can't get it right now, essentially anywhere else. It probably is, again, a $45 game that could have cost me literally right there with the example, $130. So now we're not talking $6 per game anymore, right? This is getting a little bit more extreme if you really want that. And again, you may have more discretionary income to do that. Where this is coming from is some of the SN publishers that bring stuff over there and that sell their licenses to North American companies. Well, they're not even going to try, or North American companies aren't going to have the money to be able to do it, to import it in the first place. Don't believe me? Go over to Stonemeier's website, right? He breaks it down monetarily so that any dum-dum, any smart, anybody can understand it. $10 to produce the game, publisher pays the manufacturer. $20 to distribute the cost, distributor pays the publisher. $25 retail cost, retailer pays the distributor. $50 cost for you to buy it. So they want to make 10,000 games, you invest $100,000 into the manufacturer. Best case, like I said, you sell 10,000 of those games, you make $100,000. Well, sunk costs, including previous paying for freight shipping, salaries, royalties, well, they cut that in half based on those sunk costs already in the first place. And then you either stop printing that game altogether at that point, and you make $50,000 off of $100,000, or you actually do something with that $50,000 to produce more units of the game in the first place. But again, it goes back to what I stated earlier. There's wiggle room for discount of the game. So it might not be $50. Now it's, $30 or $35. And now that overhead and that side of things is much, much, much tighter. But again, the simplistic nature of passing that burden directly onto the consumer as an additional $5 charge instead of that game being $50, now being $55, it's not impossible whatsoever, he says. But the burden of risk and the cash flow is disproportionately sooner, like I mentioned at the beginning, placed on the distributor and the retailer. And that's just economics of survival, not greed, folks. He lays it out even plain and more simple than that. If you have $1,000 to stock your shelves, you could buy 40 games previously. If you sell them all, you get $2,000 potentially. Okay, but now you can only pay for 33 games instead with the tariffs in place. And if you sell them all, you're only getting $1,815. So you're getting $195 less for the same amount previously. Again, how much longer can you afford to have a lower overhead when you've got all those other sunken costs that I mentioned if you're, say, a local store or anything else in that regard? Now, he goes even further, and I love this because he says, okay, you see the cost only at the end there. Let's include it throughout that, which ends up, I'm not going to go through the math and through the steps right here because I don't want to take much more time, $75 essentially, because it's at every level from publisher to manufacturer to distributor to retailer, then to consumer. Okay, that same example, you get $1,000. Now you only buy 27 games. 27 games for $75. It gets you 25. And that's $25 more than they made pre-tariffs to sell less games, which is now a 50% markup for you. If the publisher just wants to eat that tariff cost, he says, and pay the distributor and retailer a middle ground increase, okay, then it's not as much for you. Maybe it's a middle ground of $60, but that's still, again, trickle down everywhere. It's not just one game, it's all of them. Potentially. Not all of them, but you know what I mean. Because again, think of something in your room right now. I guarantee a vast majority of the stuff that you are using, watching, playing with, utilizing, wearing at the time of me filming this, it's not made here. And so all of that stuff too is going to have it. And so if you want that stuff more, because again, you know what? Board games aren't essential by any means. They're probably much lower priority than any of that stuff that I just made you think of in the first place. You're not going to be able to get those as easily. Then you're going to get this a hell of a lot harder too then. And then everything else trickle down. That's all I got. Stay classy. Peace out.